Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, May 27th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com. We're starting with some Ukraine stuff for a change here. Merz says no restrictions on Ukraine's missiles. So German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said on Monday that there were no longer any restrictions on Ukraine's use of Western-provided weapons in strikes on Russian territory. So Merz said, quote, "There are no more range limitations for weapons delivered to Ukraine. Neither from the Brits, nor the French, nor from us, not from the Americans either. This means that Ukraine can now defend itself, for example, by attacking military positions in Russia. Until recently, it couldn't do that, and apart from very few exceptions, it hadn't done so either," end quote. So his comments suggest that Germany may provide Ukraine with its Taurus missile, which has a range of up to 310 miles, and that would give Ukraine the ability to strike deep inside Russia with a missile like that. And in response to Merz's comments, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that if this claim is true, if all restrictions have been lifted, then it runs counter to recent efforts for peace. He called it quite a dangerous decision if it's been made. He seemed to cast doubt potentially on this being true. And so Russia's view is that strikes on its territory using Western-provided missiles put NATO in a direct war with Russia, since Ukraine needs intelligence from the U.S. to fire these weapons. And last year, so Merz said that this has never happened before, but that's not true. Last year, the Biden administration gave Ukraine the green light to fire U.S.-provided Army tactical missile systems. Those are the ATACMS missiles. They have a range of up to 190 miles. So Biden gave them the green light to fire the ATACMS into Russia, as well as the British-provided Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of about 155 miles. And then we saw those missiles being fired into Russia, and this was mainly around the battle over Kursk, which Ukraine invaded last year. They've since been pushed out of there. And so I just kind of did a brief look after I wrote this at Russian media to see if they've been reporting any ATACMS or Storm Shadow missile attacks on Russian territory. And I haven't seen any. I get just kind of a brief look, in recent weeks, there have not been reports of these missiles being used in Russian territory. But if what Merz is saying is true, we might start to see that again. And again, a big thing here is if Germany gives them the Taurus missile, because this has a range well beyond what the ATACMS and the Storm Shadows have. And Merz, he just became Germany's new chancellor. He came in on May 6th. His predecessor, Olaf Scholz, resisted the calls to send the Taurus missile, but Merz has basically said that he's willing to send this missile, and these comments strongly suggest that we might see those missiles get shipped over there pretty soon. And what did Russia do in response to Biden backing the ATACMS and Storm Shadow strikes on Russian territory? Russia responded by changing its nuclear doctrine and lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. They made very clear that these types of escalations risk nuclear war. One of the changes that they made was that they now consider if a non-nuclear armed state attacks Russian territory, and if the attack is supported by a nuclear armed state, then Russia considers that an attack by a nuclear armed power. So this is really dangerous stuff here, and it seems like the risk of escalation is coming back as the peace talks seem to be going nowhere. So it's just a very dangerous time now over Ukraine and Russia. So the next one here, Trump says Putin has gone crazy amid Russian attacks on Ukraine. So President Trump said on Sunday night that Russian President Vladimir Putin has gone crazy amid heavy Russian attacks. Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. He is needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever," end quote. So the Kremlin responded. Dmitry Peskov said that Russia appreciated Trump's push for negotiations, but suggested that he was suffering from an emotional overload, basically saying he's having some kind of emotional episode here. And you see, this is the map from South Front, their daily map of Ukraine, of the military situation. And you see all the red dots with the red text. That's where Russian strikes hit on Monday. And Ukrainian officials said on Monday that Russia had launched its heaviest drone attack yet overnight. A Ukrainian Air Force official said the Russian attack involved 355 drones. Peskov said that the Russian bombardment was a response to heavy Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian territory. And the Russian Defense Ministry said that from 10 a.m. Moscow time on Sunday to 8 a.m. Moscow time on Monday, air defenses shot down 148 Ukrainian drones over Russian territory. And according to South Front, a total of 163 were intercepted by Monday evening. And they also put out a map of the drone attacks in Russia, in all across Russian territories. So, and this is, these have really ramped up the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia. And as I mentioned yesterday, these attacks are also likely supported by the U.S. and NATO, intelligence-wise, and the U.S. also helped build up Ukraine's drone manufacturing program, spent at least $1.5 billion on that. And then we had that report yesterday that I went over that recently a Ukrainian drone swarm came near Putin's helicopter when he was visiting Kursk. So again, this risk of escalation. It's been there the whole time, but it just seems like with the increase in drone attacks and the faltering ceasefire negotiations, and now what Merz is saying, it's really coming back. And Trump also took a shot at Zelensky in his post on Truth Social. Trump said, quote, "President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. Everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. This is a war that would have never started if I were president. This is Zelensky's, Putin's, and Biden's war, not Trump's. I am only helping to put out the big and ugly fires that have been started through gross incompetence and hatred," end quote. So he says it's not his war, yet he continues to fund the war, give Ukraine military aid and intelligence support. When cutting that off is the only thing at this point that's going to end the war, just making the Ukrainians negotiate and cede territory to Russia. And I think Russia's made it very clear by announcing, they're saying they intend to create a buffer zone in Ukraine, areas that border Russia. As long as this thing goes on, Ukraine stands to lose more, and the risk of escalation seems to be getting higher and higher. All right, so the next one here, Israel strikes Gaza school, at least 36 killed. So another just horrific story from Gaza. So the Israeli military targeted a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in Gaza City early Monday morning, setting classrooms on fire and killing at least 36 people, including many women and children. Footage of the aftermath of the strike shows rescue workers pulling charred bodies from the rubble, and a video that has spread on social media appears to show a young girl attempting to escape the flames after the attack. And you can see the screenshot of the video here from Middle East Eye. It's like you see the silhouette of a young girl trying to escape this fire behind her. And she was identified as a 7-year-old Ward al-Sheikh Khalil, and she survived the attack, but lost 5 siblings and her mother. So the Israeli attack hit the Fahmi al-Jarjawi school with 3 separate strikes, while the Palestinians sheltering there were sleeping. Mahmoud Basil, spokesman for the Palestinian Civil Defense, said that hundreds of people were sheltering at the time, and that the majority of those killed were women and children. This is a picture of the aftermath of the attack. Among the dead were a father and 5 of his children. One of the survivors of the attack, who said his daughter was wounded, said that the people sheltering at the school were nothing but defenseless, peaceful civilians. Israel made its usual claim that it targeted a Hamas command and control center without providing any evidence at all. And again, you just see the majority of the casualties being women and children. And I was watching the videos from the news agencies of the people being brought to the hospital after this, and just so many little children injured, and just so horrific. And it just happens every single day. I think yesterday I said this story about the doctor losing 9 out of 10 of her kids was one of the worst things that I read. And then I see this video of this little girl in flames. It's just every single day a new atrocity, a new horror happening before our eyes and being completely supported and enabled by our government. So Palestinian health officials said that Israeli strikes killed a total of 52 people on Monday up to that point. The Al-Shifa hospital said that an Israeli attack in Jabalia, northern Gaza, killed 16 members of the same family, including 5 women and 2 children. So the daily violence continues. All right, so the next one here, Kristi Noem visits Israel, meets with Netanyahu and Ben Gvir. So U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was in Israel on Sunday and Monday, where she met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and her counterpart, National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir. According to Netanyahu's office, during a meeting with the Prime Minister and several other Israeli officials on Sunday, Noem expressed unwavering support for the Prime Minister and the State of Israel. Netanyahu's office said that she also, quote, expressed great appreciation for the Prime Minister's policy of building a fence along the Egyptian border and for his conduct of the war, end quote, referring there to what he's doing in Gaza, to the genocide in Gaza. It's just, I mean, this is, it's just despicable stuff here. And you see this picture here of Noem and Netanyahu. Noem told Fox and Friends on Monday that she and Netanyahu discussed U.S. negotiations with Iran, an issue where President Trump and Netanyahu are reportedly at odds. So this is what she said, quote, President Trump specifically sent me here to have a conversation with the Prime Minister about how those negotiations were going and how important it is that we stay united and let this process play out. It was a very candid conversation. I've known the Prime Minister for many years and had many good conversations with him, but this was one directly from the President, and I think the Prime Minister greatly appreciated it, end quote. So she declined to say what she meant by a candid conversation. She did not elaborate. But, you know, I'm betting if they are telling him, look, you got to let us we're doing these negotiations, we're pursuing these negotiations with Iran. I bet part of that conversation is you can do whatever you want to do in Gaza. We're going to go our own way on Iran. And Noem held a separate meeting with Ben Gvir, during which the Israeli minister thanked his counterpart for American support for Israel. This is according to a statement from Ben Gvir's office, and also thanked her for President Trump's immigration plan. That's what they're calling it, the immigration plan, which of course is a reference to Trump's calls for the expulsion of all the Palestinians from Gaza. And Ben Gvir, who has previously been convicted of supporting a terrorist organization, is one of the leading proponents of the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the establishment of Jewish settlements in the territory. He's been outspoken about this for a while. And Noem also met with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar on Monday and attended a ceremony for Yaron Luchinsky and Sarah Milgram, who are the Israeli embassy staffers who were shot and killed in Washington, D.C. on May 21st. The suspected shooter, Elias Rodriguez, who's a 31-year-old from Chicago, cited Gaza as the motive for his attack in the manifesto that was published by Ken Klippenstein that he wrote. All right, so the next one here, Hamas and the U.S. reach Gaza ceasefire understanding, then Israel rejects it. So this article is by Jeremy Scahill at Dropsite News. So this was published on Monday. So overnight, Hamas and U.S. officials reached a verbal understanding on the framework for a Gaza ceasefire. Sources involved with the negotiations told Dropsite's Jeremy Scahill. Dropsite has been shown the full text of the document outlining the terms which Hamas agreed. Some of the details have also been confirmed by sources interviewed by Al Jazeera and Al Mayadeen. Scahill reports that the understanding was communicated to Hamas through Palestinian-American intermediary Bishara Baba in coordination with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. Hamas accepted the terms in the document and was told that the U.S. believed the framework could work, pending Israeli approval. A senior source from Hamas told Scahill, quote, "We have accepted the Witkoff proposal, 60-day temporary ceasefire for releasing 10 living Israeli prisoners, 5 at the beginning and 5 at the end. President Trump will personally announce the agreement," end quote. But before the deal could advance, Israeli officials rushed to the media to kill it. Soon after, Witkoff publicly accused Hamas of misrepresenting the proposal, directly contradicting what sources told DropSite had been agreed to in private discussions, and the negotiations are ongoing. So what Hamas believed that they had secured a deal, again, for a 70-day ceasefire, the release of 10 Israeli captives, and a personal public guarantee from Trump committing to the ceasefire and the pullback of Israeli forces to their March 2nd position, the resumption of unrestricted aid, a cessation of all Israeli military operations. Witkoff would personally sign a ceasefire deal in Doha and shake hands with Hamas's lead negotiator. So basically, one of the big things here would be a guarantee from the U.S. that Israel would work toward a permanent ceasefire. But it didn't happen. Israel rejected it, and then Witkoff said, rejected what Hamas said, even though behind the scenes they apparently reached this agreement. All right, so the next one here, call to burn Gaza does not violate Knesset ethics rules. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So an ethics committee of the Israeli parliament has rejected a complaint against an Israeli politician who called to burn Gaza, arguing that he was exercising his free speech. Nissim Vaturi made the call repeatedly after the October 7th, 2023 attacks by Hamas-led Palestinian fighters on southern Israel. A Knesset committee said that it examined the remarks and believed that they are of a political nature and accurately reflect the Knesset members' ideology. In a statement, the committee said, quote, "The committee believes the remarks do not add respect to the Knesset as an institution, particularly in light of his being a deputy Knesset speaker, but due to the importance of safeguarding freedom of speech, there is no justification for ruling that he violated the ethics rules," end quote. A complaint was filed by left-leaning Knesset member Ofer Kassif, who has been a critic of the ongoing mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, which he has called a genocidal massacre. Kassif has himself been suspended from the Knesset for his criticism of the war and is a rare opponent of Israel's treatment of Palestinians within Israel's legislative body. So he's been suspended, reprimanded for criticizing what's happening in Gaza. And this other Israeli MK, he's the deputy speaker. He's a deputy speaker of the Knesset. No reprimand for calling, to burn Gaza. And he's also called for the killing of all adults in Gaza. Calling them, and he's called Palestinian scoundrels and subhumans, adding that they were a group of people that cannot be accepted by anyone. He said, quote, "Who is innocent in Gaza? Civilians went out and slaughtered people in cold blood. They are outcasts and no one in the world wants them. We need to separate the children and women and kill the adults in Gaza. We are being too considerate," end quote. So pretty rough stuff here. All right, so the next one here, Israeli foreign minister threatens to annex the West Bank. This article is from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute. So this is the Israeli response to several countries saying that they're getting ready to recognize a Palestinian state. So Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar and Strategic Affairs Minister Ram Dermer have threatened to annex illegal Jewish-only settlements in the occupied West Bank along with the Jordan Valley. These statements come amid growing international support for recognizing a Palestinian state. So Dermer spoke with France's foreign minister and warned that Israel could take unilateral steps in response to a potential international recognition of a Palestinian state. So essentially, this is the threat. We're seeing France is talking about recognizing a Palestinian state. I believe some other countries as well. I want to say Malta might be one. But essentially, the threat from Israel is, well, if you recognize a state, then we could just annex the West Bank outright, even though this area that they're talking about has essentially been de facto annexed by Israel. But this is the threat. You recognize a Palestinian state, we'll take more territory from the Palestinians. All right, so the next one here, far-right Israelis chant death to Arabs amid Jerusalem Day March. So this article is from Al Jazeera. So there was the big Jerusalem Day March in Jerusalem on Monday. So right-wing Israelis in Jerusalem have stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and a United Nations facility for Palestinian refugees as an annual march took place marking Israel's conquest of the eastern part of the city. Some Israelis chanted "Death to Arabs" and "May your village burn" as they marched through the alleyways of Jerusalem's Old City on Monday, going through the Muslim quarter to mark Jerusalem Day, which commemorates the Israeli occupation and annexation of East Jerusalem after the 1967 war. Thousands of heavily armed police and border police were dispatched in advance because settlers regularly assault, attack, and harass Palestinians and shops in the Muslim quarter. The settlers live in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem in settlements and outposts which are illegal under international law. Groups of young people, some carrying Israeli flags, were seen on Monday confronting Palestinian shopkeepers, passersby, and school children, as well as Israeli rights activists and police, at times spitting at people, lobbing insults, and trying to force their way into houses. For the most part, the Palestinian shopkeepers, close up shop for this march, and because they know that they'll be harassed, assaulted, and this is something that happens every year. Of course, these people, these settlers are way more emboldened by everything that's been happening. They were carrying banners saying, we took Jerusalem in 1967, that this year, 2025, we'll take Gaza, something along those lines. And Ben Gvir, is their hero. Whenever he shows up to these crowds, they chant, that he's the future prime minister. And he gave a speech during this event. But it really brings out the worst of, the Israeli settlers, this Jerusalem Day march. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. now has 500 troops in Taiwan. So this, I think, is a pretty big deal. So a retired U.S. Navy admiral recently revealed that the U.S. has 500 troops in Taiwan, which is a major challenge to Beijing's red lines over the island. So retired Admiral Mark Montgomery made the disclosure at a House hearing on May 15th. Where he was arguing that the U.S. should send more military personnel to Taiwan. So again, he made these comments on May 15th. I didn't see this until today because the South China Morning Post had a story on it. So Montgomery, and he now works for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, the FDD, which is an extremely hawkish think tank. He said this at the House hearing. Quote, "We absolutely have to grow the Joint Training Team in Taiwan. That's a U.S. team there that's about 500 people now. It needs to be 1,000 if we're going to give them billions of dollars in assistance, sell them tens of billions of dollars worth of U.S. gear. It makes sense that we'd be over there training and working," end quote. So far, the Pentagon has not confirmed this number. I might try asking them this week, but due to the sensitivity of the matter, the U.S. military typically offers no details about its military operations in Taiwan because it's a very sensitive area. And so basically the history here is that, the U.S. and Taiwan used to be allies, treaty allies. Then the U.S. cut off diplomatic relations with Taiwan to open up with China. They officially cut the relations in 1979. Since then, the U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan and has sent very small numbers of military trainers, like a few dozen at a time, to Taiwan, but it was never officially acknowledged. It was kind of an open secret. In 2021, Tsai Ing-wen, who was the president of Taiwan at the time, was the first Taiwanese leader since 1979 to acknowledge the presence of U.S. troops on Taiwanese territory. So that was kind of a big deal. A couple of years later, in 2023, there were reports that the U.S. increased its military presence in Taiwan to 200 troops, a lot more than just a few dozen that were usually there. And then last year, Taiwan confirmed that the U.S. military has actually deployed trainers, Green Berets, to the Kinmen Islands, which are islands that are controlled by Taiwan, but are actually basically on the coast of mainland China. And some of the islands are only 2.5 miles away from mainland China. So that's very provocative, obviously. And now this 500 U.S. troops in Taiwan might not sound like much compared to other deployments, but this is a huge red line for China, and they've been warning for years now against the U.S. increasing its military and diplomatic support for Taiwan. And this has included providing military aid, selling lots of weapons, and diplomatic steps that might not seem like much, but again are just really rubbing it in China, really like again, it's just such a sensitive thing that we're dealing with here. So we just keep seeing these escalations, these incremental steps. And the Pentagon is also openly preparing for war with China over Taiwan. It's an area I've been neglecting that I really need to focus on more. But this stuff still goes on. This U.S. military buildup in the Asia Pacific continues. And again, they're explicitly preparing for war with China. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. launches another airstrike in Somalia. So U.S. Africa Command said in a press release on Monday that its forces conducted airstrikes in Somalia against al-Shabaab on May 21st. AFRICOM said that the strikes were launched in support of the U.S.-backed government and occurred approximately 27 miles northwest of the southern coastal city of Kismayo. The command offered no other details about the strikes and said that they wouldn't be releasing specific details, which is what they've been saying. And AFRICOM told me that they're not releasing any figures on their casualties, on estimates of civilian harm in their press releases on airstrikes as the new Trump administration settles in. That's what they told me more than 100 days, into the new administration. So Horseed Media, which is a Somali media outlet, reported that 45 al-Shabaab fighters were killed in operations that involved airstrikes on May 20th and May 21st. So I thought maybe these airstrikes that AFRICOM reported could have been launched, could have been part of that battle where they say 45 al-Shabaab fighters were killed. But this report said that the fighting took place in areas in the Haran and Lower Shabelle regions of Somalia, which are further north than where AFRICOM said they launched the strike. So, I think there's a chance here that AFRICOM is like really underreporting its airstrikes in Somalia, and we might not really have an idea of the scale, even though they've already reported a lot. So based on just the AFRICOM press releases, the May 21st strike, the new one that they reported, marks the 26th time that the U.S. bombed Somalia under the new Trump administration. So they're bombing Somalia at a pace that they could break the record 63 airstrikes in a year, which they set in 2019. But again, it's unclear if the command is reporting every U.S. airstrike. If you remember last week, I covered an airstrike that was announced by the White House that they said happened on May 19th. And that has not been reported by AFRICOM. So we don't know exactly how many airstrikes that the U.S. has been launching in Somalia. And this is an air campaign that just goes completely unreported. There's just virtually no coverage of it in English language media. A lot of times, I'll be the only one to cover an airstrike beyond the AFRICOM press release that's put out. So this is just, something I'm really trying to figure out more about, what's happening on the ground in Somalia, but it's very hard. All right, so the last one here, Trump says the fifth round of talks with Iran was very, very good. So this article is from The Cradle. So this was on Sunday night. Trump said that there have been very, very good talks with Iran on the nuclear issue. He said, quote, "We've had some very, very good talks with Iran, and I don't know if I'll be telling you anything good or bad over the next 2 days, but I have a feeling I might be telling you something good. We've had some real progress, serious progress. Let's see what happens, but I think we could have some good news on the Iran front," end quote. And the Iranians had positive things to say after the latest round of U.S.-Iran negotiations that took place on Friday. The foreign minister described them as the most professional round of talks that they've had so far. So hopefully, despite all this kind of bluster from U.S. officials about the zero enrichment demand, behind the scenes, they must be telling them something different, or else these negotiations wouldn't be going anywhere. So hopefully they continue to progress and war is avoided. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Snyder. Western media falsely presented the Ukraine-Russia talks as a failure. One from Ron Paul. Take the Iran deal, President Trump. One from Abigail R. Hall. Signalgate 2.0 and the casual indifference to war. One from Ted Galen Carpenter, James Comey should be shunned, not prosecuted. And our spotlight from John Hoffman, Trump-Netanyahu rift hinges on Gaza and Iran. So please go check all of that out. Lots of stuff to read, even if you listen to or watch this show. You could always support us by liking, subscribing, commenting. All that stuff helps out. Sharing the show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com and follow us on social media. I hope if you had a long weekend, if you had Memorial Day off, that you had a nice weekend. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.